Well, hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I am Joshua Barnes. You join us for our live rolling coverage ahead of this summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And that plane that you can see on the screen right now is containing US President Donald Trump. His plane has arrived in Alaska ahead of this summit. What you can see now is the stairs being readied for the US President to step off and prepare for this meeting with Vladimir Putin. Of course, we have been told that Donald Trump will be meeting with Vladimir Putin as he arrives by flight, of course, coming from Russia. But as we stand right now, the US President making his flight from Washington, D.C. is landing. It has landed, and he is expected to shortly be unboarding and taking the steps down. Of course, this summit has so many permutations. There is so much at stake here. Questions have been raised over whether this will be the key to unlocking a peace deal. Trump's rhetoric coming into it has been one of strength. He has put pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin in recent weeks, setting deadlines. And of course, heading into this summit itself, Trump has said that he wants to try and get as close to a deal and potentially get something over the line today in order to end this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has raged for over 3 years. These live visuals we are showing you from Anchorage, Alaska, the venue in which this much awaited summit is set to take place between the presidents of the United States and Russia. This meeting, of course, coming at a time of uncertainty, pressure on a ceasefire. As we zoom in now to what we can see and what we expect to see as this door opening. And we will now go to Megha Sharma, Senior Executive Editor at NewsX World, while we await Donald Trump to onboard. Megha, how significant could this meeting be for peace between Russia and Ukraine?
Yes, absolutely. It is perhaps the most significant meeting that is being held between US President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But more importantly, I am going to give you a brief history about what is the significance of Alaska, of Anchorage, and why both the leaders decided to hold this meeting over here. Firstly, this is the historic land that was once a colony of the Soviet Union. It was sold to the United States of America, and since then it is part of the country. And not just that, this is also the one place which is equidistant from Russia and from Washington, D.C. So this helps the cause of both these leaders who have big egos. And of course, when you talk about this is perhaps the closest the both could come to deciding on a territory that is neutral ground. If not completely neutral, but yes, coming back to, yes, you see that airplane, and the US President is soon going to be descending from those stairs. This is the Elmendorf Airport, where the Air Force One aircraft of Donald Trump has landed. Remember, Donald Trump is also being accompanied by Vice President of United States of America, J.D. Vance. He is also going to be accompanied by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and a number of other members of his cabinet. Of course, Steve Witkoff is going to be there. We have Steve Bessent, who is also going to be arriving with him. A total of 7 delegate members who are going to be accompanying US President Donald Trump when he holds that meeting. So even as it is being said that it's a one-on-one meeting, the delegates from the Russian government and from the US government are going to be present while both the leaders hold that meeting. Remember, Vladimir Putin is also going to be accompanied by his coterie, which includes, of course, the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, but there is the finance minister, the defense minister, and also his special envoys, his special advisors when it comes to commerce and economics as well as foreign policy are going to be with him, standing by his side when that bilateral happens.
Yes, absolutely. Megha, very quickly staying with you. Of course, this conversation is mainly going to focus on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But of course, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is not there. Why is that significant?
Yes, so Trump, even before he boarded that plane, and he has been saying this for the past 2 days, despite mounting pressure from European nations as well as Ukraine, that there has to be a three-way meeting, there has to be a trilateral to happen between Ukraine, Russia, and United States of America, but that has not happened. What Trump has been justifying it as is this is a stepping stone to a trilateral meeting that may or may not happen depending on what is the outcome of this particular meeting, this particular summit between the two leaders. This is something that Kremlin has also echoed in just a while ago, a couple of hours ago. Kremlin also released its official statements saying that it expects results to happen from this summit between both the leaders, and it goes on to say, it expresses hope actually, saying that if there are any positive results that come out of this meeting, there is a likelihood of a trilateral that may happen between these three leaders, including Zelensky. So there's hope. It's not just Trump that is at this point in time advocating that there will be, this is a first meeting, and if everything goes well, there will be a trilateral that will happen, which will actually be the meeting where the points, the salient points of the peace deal, of the ceasefire, are going to be discussed amongst all the three leaders. This is something that Kremlin has also echoed. So I think both sides are on the same page, and this is something that I think Europe and Ukraine are also, they are agreeable on this kind of a setup that at this point Trump and Putin have come to.
Yes, absolutely. Megha, thank you ever so much for providing that context and insights. Also joining us to discuss all of the ramifications ahead of this meeting as we await Donald Trump stepping down those stairs to get off Air Force One. Starting off with Andrew Latham, a professor of international relations who joins us live from Minnesota. Andrew, I'd like to build on the points that Megha was making. There's optimism from Russia. There's optimism, of course, from the US. In your opinion, is this really a pivotal turning point in getting a potential peace deal done as soon as possible to end more than 3 years of fighting between Russia and Ukraine?
Maybe. I don't think that either President Trump or President Putin are really motivated by peace or war in Ukraine. They're looking at a bilateral relationship and about repairing that. We know that President Trump, he doesn't have an affection for Putin, but he sees the world the way it is, and he wants Russia to be a little closer to the United States and a little more distant from China. And of course, President Putin wants to be out from under American sanctions and to normalize relations to some extent. The sticking point is the war in Ukraine. And Putin has made his position on this very, very clear and unambiguous, that the core of Donbass is already incorporated legally into the Russian constitution as part of the Russian Federation. He's not going to give that up. He might be able to do a little bit of dealing on the margins, territories that aren't historically Russian, but that remains to be seen. And President Trump is making, as usual, all kinds of signals. Some days it's, I'll go along with anything. Some days he's responding to the Europeans and the Ukrainians that that the Ukrainians need a seat at the table. So when I look at the short term, this particular summit, I don't think much other than maybe a gentleman's agreement about a few things and some handshakes and some nice optics. The real business of resolving the conflict over Ukraine will take place, as the previous commentator pointed out, in a future trilateral, if Putin will agree to that, and that's very much in doubt in my mind. So we will see. I think everybody will declare victory at the end of this summit, except for the people on the ground in Ukraine, who I think will not be experiencing this as a victory.
Also joining us as we still await Donald Trump onboarding from Air Force One is Scott Faulkner, head of the Eagle Enterprises, a security firm based in Washington. Scott joining us live from Washington. As always, a pleasure to speak with you, Scott. Thank you for your time. Let's look really Donald Trump's aims here. Of course, he is joined by his top team. Megha Sharma also clarifying that these key parts, these key cogs in Trump's top team are going to be present. What do you think Trump's aim is here? He said that he wants to get a deal done. He's also acknowledged in recent days that there might and possibly will need to be a trilateral between Russia, Ukraine and the US. What do you think would be a win for Trump coming out of this talk?
Well, first of all, it's already a win for Putin because he's now viewed as an equal and as an equal world power to the United States and to Trump. And that's one of the things Putin craves, is that international recognition that he's truly a first-tier world leader, which he's not. But he wants to have that visual, which he's achieving in the Anchorage summit. But in terms of Trump in general, Trump still talks about stopping the killing, but he's not talking about stopping the aggression. And it's the aggression that is causing the killing. And so it'll be interesting to see whether they are meeting for 2 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours. There's all sorts of speculation as to how long they're going to meet, is what's really going to come out of this. If Putin digs in his heels, Trump says he might walk and immediately issue additional sanctions. We'll see if that happens. But Trump, he's still eyeing that peace prize. He's successfully brokered some other peace deals around the world, including in Africa and Azerbaijan. But this is a different thing. We have Vladimir Putin, who really does want to recreate the Soviet Empire. And this is just one of those stepping stones. And he's going to probably do everything he can to play for time to continue to not only consolidate his gains in the Donbass, but also bring additional resources up to maybe push even further west into Ukraine. So it's going to be interesting to see what really happens from this. But I said already, because Trump has now put Putin on an equal footing with the United States, Putin is already can declare victory.
Yes, absolutely. And as we continue to show you live visuals from Anchorage in Alaska, we're also joined by Paul Goncharov, who is a financial analyst joining us live from Moscow in Russia. Paul, thank you for your time. Sanctions mentioned there by Scott. And of course, Russia has been clear in stating that these talks are not just focusing on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but there is also bilateral matters, including economic matters, to be discussed with the US. How significant are these talks, and how significant would it be if there is a breakdown in these talks for those bilateral relations with potential economic impacts? Well, while we wait to connect once again with Paul, Scott, I will pose that same question to you. Of course, bilateral relations that have warmed between the US and Russia since Trump took office for a second time. But there is a risk of this falling apart. Trump says he could walk away if Russia aren't keen on moving towards peace. How pivotal is this for the relations of the US and Russia and those bilateral agreements that are set to be discussed? Scott, just checking that you're there.
Oh, okay. Again, Trump's entire approach to the world besides America first is let's make money instead of war. And so he's hoping that something will come out of Alaska which will create more of a mutual economic benefit for both Russia and the United States. But again, we're dealing not with an honest broker. I mean, Putin has violated every single agreement he's signed since becoming president of Russia. So how much can we trust him on any front? And how much of an economic incentive is going to basically rein him in? That's still to be determined.
Yes, absolutely. And Andrew, coming back to you, I do want to clarify, these visuals we are showing you are live, of course. Air Force One has arrived in Alaska, and we expect Donald Trump to be making his way soon. But Andrew, coming back to you, of course, I do want to clarify, of course, Ukraine's position here. They've said that they do not want to concede land. They've said that, of course, they need to be part of any discussions. Does that limit the possibilities available at this summit because Vladimir Zelensky and European nations who are so key in supporting Ukraine are not there at Alaska?
I think so. This is not Yalta. This is not 1945. This is not the Soviets and the Americans deciding where the split will be in Europe and territoriality and so on and so forth. This is more complicated. Ukraine's legitimate concerns have to be taken into account, which makes this, Ukraine and Russia have irreconcilable differences with respect to the territory that we will just call the Donbass for a shorthand. I think that's going to be incredibly difficult for them to get over. But the point is that they will be at the table, not because Zelensky has a great deal of influence with the White House, but because Keir Starmer and Merz and Macron and various other influential and powerful European partners of the United States are insisting that the Ukrainians have a seat at the table. And President Trump has changed his mind about this. Sometimes in the not too distant past, he's blown it off. This can be a bilateral thing. But more recently, he's come around to the view that no, at the next meeting, it has to be a trilateral, not a bilateral. So this is not Yalta. This is not the Congress of Vienna even. This is something different, something new. And I would caution everybody, not around this table, but around the larger table, not to get over their skis and get too enthusiastic about all the positive things that might come, because I think there will be some, but they will be handshakes and gentlemen's agreements on the margins, and they won't get to the big issues.
Yes, we are now joined by Paul Goncharov. Thank you for joining us. As a financial analyst, you are very well placed to look at these sanctions that were threatened by Donald Trump. Of course, US politicians have spoken about potential tariffs of up to 500%. So far, only India has been hit with tariffs for purchasing Russian oil. Do you think that could change if there is a breakdown in these talks?
No, well, perhaps the more tariffs will be placed, maybe higher percentages, but the principle of tariffs themselves and how Russia or China or India or any of the BRICS or global South countries respond, I think it's more and more staying the course. They're not going to respond to tariffs anymore. This is already too humiliating to put an emotional tint on it. Economically, they really don't matter that much. Europe, as far as Russia is concerned and others, can't really put that much pressure on. The United States, well, it's just going to make things more inconvenient and drive de-dollarization even faster.
Yes, and Paul, staying with you, how impactful will those sanctions be on Russia if they do come into force? Of course, Donald Trump has spoken so much about impacting Russia and stopping the Russian war machine, as he calls it.
Well, it's been tried already, what, 19 times now? It's viewed very differently from where I'm sitting here in Russia or from Wall Street. Now, I'm an American, I'm a New Yorker. And I see a huge divergence between what we hear, what we see, and what we understand stateside, as opposed to what we see, what we can feel and touch and taste here. World of difference. And Russia is pretty much totally pivoted to the east. So in terms of supply chains, they've all been changed. Payment, they're all changing. A little bit is left in the dollar, but it's insignificant.
Yes.
I think that pretty much caps it off.
Yes, absolutely.
As far as viewpoints here, what are the realistic desires? This is what I've been hearing, that doubtful any peace agreement will be reached at this meeting, but what might, one of the positives that may come out of it is a deal on nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia. That really has to be prioritized. And secondly, business transactions. You have the Arctic to talk about, joint ventures between the United States and Russia. These things can be managed. What is happening in the Ukraine, that conflict has been going on for decades. I'm really talking decades, even from before the Soviet time. This is not going to be resolved in an hour or two or months. So,
yes. Absolutely. Andrew, I'm going to come to you next. There has been a lot placed, of course, from Europe on support for Ukraine from the US. We've seen that ebb and flow. Of course, a meeting between Vladimir Zelensky, J.D. Vance, Vice President, and President Trump in the White House months ago. It seems like only yesterday, but of course that relationship breakdown was key to the next few months of this conflict. Do you think that arms support from the US could be a point of contention in these discussions? Of course, Russia has spoken about guarantees for Ukraine if a ceasefire is agreed. They don't want troops in Ukraine from allies, and they don't want arms supplies to continue.
That's another point of contention. Before I get into that, I want to agree with Paul. There are big bilateral issues between the US and Russia that can and need to be addressed. The START treaty, which is a nuclear treaty, is expiring soon. The Arctic has to be co-managed in a way that it really hasn't been recently. Russia has been booted off the Arctic Council and so on. So there's a lot of bilateral things that could be discussed here profitably. And I mean that both literally and metaphorically, profitably. But when it comes to what Russia wants with respect to, well, Ukraine's situation and all of this, the Russians are not going to agree to any NATO membership. They're not going to agree to any backstop force of Russian or British forces in the western part of Ukraine. They're not going to agree to withdraw from most of the territory that they occupy now. In fact, they want a little bit more because they don't occupy all of those 4 oblasts. They occupy some other stuff that they might trade away, but I really see these differences as being irreconcilable. Now, if the United States puts enough pressure on Zelensky and his team, maybe it'll be a fudge. It'll be, well, we don't recognize legally the Donbass as part of the Russian Federation, but we can accept for ceasefire purposes that the Russian troops will be occupying these territories for the foreseeable future. So there's a possibility, not at this meeting, but at the next meeting, the trilateral, that some fudging of these irreconcilable differences can be done under the guise of a ceasefire, not a permanent peace arrangement. But at this, I'm most hopeful at this summit that the U.S. and Russia, the 2 presidents roll their sleeves up, not to arm wrestle, but to get the business done that the 2 countries need to get done.
Yes, Andrew, I'd like to stay with you, and I'd like to build on the point that you were saying, using your phrase, fudging at least the ceasefire deal. Of course, Vladimir Zelensky would have to agree to that. He's spoken about land concessions being a non-negotiable, a red line, non-constitutional. Do you think he would ever agree to those fudged terms in order to try and get a deal over the line to at least stop the fighting for a shorter period of time?
Yeah, if we're looking at a ceasefire as opposed to permanent peace, I think both parties would say, President Putin has talked about a ceasefire in the air, which is easily verified. On the ground, it's much more complicated. I think both sides would be willing to more or less freeze this situation on the ground and in the air as it is now, with the following caveats. It's not permanent. Neither side is willing to make a permanent concession. Neither side can make a permanent. Vladimir Zelensky is not in a position to trade away a big chunk of Ukraine. And President Putin is not in a position to trade away a big chunk of what he considers to be historical and legal now, Russia. It's just not in the cards. But as a temporary measure to stop the shooting and killing, there's a possibility, not at this meeting, this might lay the predicate, but at the next meeting with Zelensky and his team at the table, maybe something can be done there. But it's going to end up being, best case scenario, North Korea and South Korea all over again.
Yes,
the U.S. is still technically at war with North Korea, so is South Korea. It's an armistice, but it's been permanent now more than half a century, and both sides have learned to live with it, uncomfortably, but they've learned to live with it. That's a possibility.
Yes, and if you are just joining us, I want to bring you in to this discussion, of course, we're having as we show you those live visuals of Air Force One. We expect Donald Trump to be stepping out from Air Force One, having landed in Anchorage, Alaska. Scott, I want to build off what we've just heard from Andrew there. Of course, looking at a potential way of living with these terms that may be agreed, similar to the South Korea and North Korea armistice that is at play. Do you think that would be something Vladimir Putin would ever want. Of course, Western Europe and Ukraine, experts from those regions say that this is something that Vladimir Putin has always wanted to do, and he will want to continue moving forward into Ukraine and won't just settle with the 20% of Ukraine that they already control.
Well, again, Putin has never fully adhered to any treaty or agreement he's ever signed in his life. So he will probably sign something because he wants to consolidate his gains in the Donbass. He'd like to bring up more logistics, more people, more supplies to push even further west. He'd like to be able to take over what they call the fortress cities on the western edge of the Donbass. So because after those fortress cities, it's basically open farmland. So he could sprint through a good chunk of Ukraine at will when he thinks that Trump is looking the other way. The other big wrinkle in all this is going back to April 30th. Trump and Zelensky signed an agreement dealing with strategic minerals. And many of those minerals are in the mountains on the ridges in the western part of Donbass. So if Russia occupies that area, what happens to that agreement where we're supposed to have access to all these key minerals? So that's a big issue that has to be resolved, because if Russia sits there with all their troops, then all of a sudden that in April 2025 agreement just basically went obsolete.
Yes, and I just want to bring some updates to you watching at home. Of course, we've been showing this visual for quite some time now, an open door on Air Force One, anticipating Donald Trump to take the steps down onto the ground in Alaska. Just to clarify, I've had some information through saying that Trump is greeting Alaskan politicians on Air Force One, and that is why the descent down those steps is taking some time. Those conversations taking place aboard Air Force One. Once they conclude, then we do expect Donald Trump to make those steps down ahead of meeting Vladimir Putin on this same runway. Scott, staying with you, so many different points that we could discuss here, but I do want to bring in the active conflict that is at play. So much is spoken about diplomacy relating to this conflict, but there are civilians living in both Russia and Ukraine who have been affected, civilians killed in this conflict. Donald Trump himself has spoken about the thousands of people dying on a weekly basis. Do you think the humanitarian aspect of this conflict is set to take centre stage with Donald Trump leading these talks?
Well, he certainly talks about stopping the killing. One other aspect of the humanitarian crisis there is that 20,000 children have been kidnapped by Russian forces and taken into Russia. This is sort of part of the old Soviet playbook of Russification, where you basically grab children and shape them into young Russians. And so the fact that that 20,000 children needs to be resolved as well. Do you really want to let that epic level of kidnapping stand? And so that should be another issue brought up. But yeah, again, we're back to the issue here of that, yes, we want to stop the killing, but the killing is happening because we didn't stop the aggression. A very weak Biden administration emboldened Putin, and Biden then not only, he said he gave aid to Ukraine, but only enough to have him hold on. The United States and the West never gave Ukraine enough weaponry, fast enough, and the right kind of weaponry to win. They could have. And one example, just to give a quick one here, is the A-10, which is called the Warthog, is the finest tank-destroying aircraft ever built. And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to basically retire that fleet of A-10s and put them in the Arizona desert as part of the mothball fleet. Why didn't we just send them all to Ukraine as the most effective tank-busting planes on the planet? These are the kinds of things that should have been done. The Ukraine sank, a fraction of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. Why didn't we help them sink the entire Black Sea fleet of the Russians? It's just all these kind of things that are missed opportunities to have really helped the Ukrainians actually win, as opposed to just hang on.
Yes, Paul, I'd like to come back to you. Of course, as an American living in Moscow, or at least in Moscow right now. Could you provide some context on how this is being seen from Russia's perspective? How is it being reported on, and what is the consensus amongst Russian people, given that Russia is reporting further gains on the battlefield, and of course accusations have been thrown at the Russian administration that this conflict is being delayed to strengthen Russia's hand?
Well, I don't know where to begin. As an American here, and I've been working here for a while. I speak the language fluently. Maybe we'll start this way. I went to the what's known as the Donbass in 2014, and I saw with my own eyes what was happening. That it was Ukrainian strikes against Russian citizens, or Ukrainian citizens actually, that was incredibly destructive. And that caused an evacuation of a lot of children who couldn't find their parents, couldn't find. And as the conflict amped up until 2022, 2023, these children were not left in the battle zone. They were taken wherever safety was.
Paul, I'm sorry to interject. I just want to highlight some visuals that we are showing you now live from Alaska. Of course, we've seen Air Force One, which is stationary currently in Anchorage. These visuals that we are showing you now is a plane which has Vladimir Putin and his top team inside. These are live visuals we are showing you. Both planes containing both presidents and their top teams on the runway in Anchorage. This, of course, live footage, a huge development. Both leaders of these two nations are there, both in Alaska ahead of this meeting. We had information earlier, of course, which we have brought you throughout the day, which said that Donald Trump is set to welcome Vladimir Putin as he lands, as he steps off this plane. We expect that still to be happening. We've not had any further update to the contrary of that information, but these live visuals showing you just the moment now where Vladimir Putin has touched down on American soil in Alaska ahead of this extremely pivotal conversation that could have ramifications for not just the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also geopolitics as a whole, relations between two of the largest powers in the world, both economically but also in terms of influence. This pivotal moment, and so much set to be discussed. Not just the conflict, not just the economy, potential tariffs, also security as well, with conversations set to take place around the nuclear aspect too, in the wake of recent conversations and moves from Donald Trump moving two submarines into closer areas. So much to be discussed, and here Vladimir Putin's plane arriving. We will continue to, of course, bring you both of these live visuals that we have been showing you. Donald Trump, for the last few minutes at least, has been in discussion with Alaskan politicians aboard Air Force One. This now, the plane holding Russian President Vladimir Putin and his top team. Let's just clarify this. Both Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump have brought their key men within their administration, the key team members that help contribute towards shaping policy and rhetoric and discussions over this conflict. I just want to bring you in as we continue to show you this live visual, just to bring you an update, a report that we've had. And of course, it had been reported that there would be a one-on-one meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that would take place. Reports are now suggesting that this previously planned one-on-one meeting is set to be a three-on-three meeting. That, according to the White House pool reports, Trump is set now to be joined by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, somebody, of course, who has already met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on multiple separate occasions. Just to bring you in on the plan that we're expecting to happen after both leaders leave their aircraft and, of course, have that initial moment of embrace. There is set to be a lunch following the meeting where Rubio, Witkoff and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, along with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth and Trump's Chief of Staff Susie Wiles will also be present. As we've mentioned with our guests as well, so many different points of discussion which are set to take place, not just this Russia-Ukraine conflict, but that is one of the key, of course, objectives of these talks, these bilateral talks, which are going to take place. We continue to show you these live visuals again. They're both from Anchorage, Alaska, with both planes on the tarmac at the same time. Donald Trump is expected to depart from Air Force One very shortly, and we will continue to show you both of these live visuals as we expect these two pivotal world leaders to onboard from their planes. I just want to thank our guests who joined us for the first half an hour of our rolling coverage ahead of this summit. I want to thank Paul Goncharoff, Scott Faulkner as well for taking the time to speak with us, and finally Andrew Latham for their insights. This moment is pivotal. We are going to be joined live by my colleague as well very shortly, but while I wait for confirmation of that, he is now ready. So Thomas Porteous, my colleague, anchor and correspondent, joining us live from the newsroom, is here to discuss the significance of this moment once again. Thomas, as always, a pleasure to be speaking with you. Both world leaders are on the tarmac. What is at stake here?
All you say, Joshua, that could be an understatement. This has been Europe's deadliest war since World War II, and the first time a Russian president has been on US soil since the year of 1988. We've had strong words from both parties leading into this. Donald Trump saying he will be very upset if a ceasefire deal isn't reached today. Doubts remain from the public, along with criticism that, of course, Ukraine is not present at these talks, but both have brought their top teams with them. There is a lot of confusion around the style of the meetings, the events of the day, but one thing is for sure, this is going to be significant. All eyes are on Alaska today as a red carpet is rolled out for both the Russian president and the US president. These talks have been coming for the 6 months of Donald Trump's presidency. We've seen multiple phone calls, direct phone calls between both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. However, today they meet in person with a ceasefire deal. Maybe too much of a long shot, many analysts are saying, and of course the absence of Ukraine is very significant in that regard. You said previously that the reported one-on-one meeting that was meant to happen between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin has now turned into a three-on-three meeting with the US and Russian counterparts along with their closest advisors. So here we are waiting for both leaders to disboard their aircrafts, and we of course will bring you all the updates as we get them, and we're showing you the visuals right now.
Yes, absolutely, Thomas. You mentioned rolling out the red carpets. We're showing live visuals of Vladimir Putin's plane where the red carpet has just been rolled out. The door is still closed, as you can see, but we do expect that door to open shortly. Just to reiterate what Tom was saying there, of course, a one-on-one meeting now becoming a three-on-three. I brought you the updates of who would be accompanying Donald Trump, but now we have information as well coming on who will be joining Vladimir Putin in this three-on-three. He'll be joined by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his aide Ushakov as the doors open to Vladimir Putin's plane. We just a short while ago showed you the proximity between these two planes. Of course, a European conflict with so much influence in the United States. Now these two world leaders, continents apart, just meters apart, with both planes on the runway at the same time. A symbolic image that is seen, of course, but also a clear and important moment in history. Over 3 years of conflict. Around 1 million Russian soldiers are reportedly dead in this war with Ukraine. Now Russian President Vladimir Putin set to step on to US soil in Anchorage, Alaska. And again, we've cut frames, but just to clarify, these planes are on the same runway, mere meters apart. And the significance and the symbolism of this moment cannot be understated as we wait for these world leaders to step down. Of course, I am joined by guests to discuss this moment and just waiting for some clarity on that as we wait for those connections to be made. I just want to reiterate, of course, Vladimir Zelensky is not present at this meeting, and joining us now is Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions, who joins us from Portland. Both leaders of Russia and the US, Daniel, are just hundreds of meters away, and it's of course such a poignant time in this conflict, which has geopolitical ramifications. How significant do you see this meeting, Daniel, in the face, of course, of threats against Russia from the US?
I see this meeting as potentially extremely significant because it has 3 potential components. One, of course, is the beginning of the resolution of the Ukraine conflict, but secondarily at stake are the US, Russian, and to a lesser extent, other countries in the global arena, their economies. And then there is the geopolitical dimension. And I think the biggest incentive for Putin, apart from the first 2, is then the geopolitical dimension. We all know what's at stake for the Ukraine conflict. We all know that the Russian economy is under pressure and could get under substantially more pressure very soon if these sanctions are put into place. But less talked about is the potential impact for the geopolitical realignment that's currently going on under the Trump administration and what that implies for Russia. So I think that Putin asked for this meeting because of the convergence of all 3 of those things at one time.
Yes, and also joining us to discuss the moments leading up to this meeting and the impact of this meeting is Cliff Smith, National Security and Government Affairs professional, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Cliff, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us. Of course, national security is something that is set to be a talking point here. The nuclear word has been used by Russia throughout this conflict, but more recently, Donald Trump also talking and taking action relating to nuclear assets. How significant is geopolitical stability and security amidst this time of uncertainty?
I mean, clearly the Ukraine war itself has affected geopolitical stability and such. This meeting per se, I don't think significantly changes anything. I mean, at the end of the day, Trump is going to be talking to Putin, as you pointed out. Zelensky's not at the table. Who knows what will come out of it? But anything significant, I mean, is going to have to go through many iterations. And, you know, if
Cliff, I just need to cut you off. Apologies for doing so. Donald Trump is now taking steps off of Air Force One. These live visuals that we are showing you, highlighting and showing the US president taking the steps down from his plane to step onto the ground, the tarmac of this runway in Anchorage, Alaska, ahead of this hugely pivotal moment. Of course, he is joined with his top team, but right now he is walking down on his own, walking across the tarmac, heading towards this red carpet. And at the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin is also taking steps down from his aircraft. Both leaders leaving their planes at the same time, touching down on the tarmac at the same time. And we are about to see the 2 leaders come together. So much has been spoken about ahead of this meeting. We've known it has been coming. Conversations with other world leaders, conversations from geopolitical experts weighing in, but the moment is now here. Donald Trump making his way on to the red carpet that has been laid out. The two leaders about to meet. Of course, so much to be discussed. Number one, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Threats from Donald Trump directly to Vladimir Putin have been accompanied with warm rhetoric and more of a relationship than, of course, was there with the Biden administration. This moment is long overdue. We knew this was coming, and the pace in which they're both walking, of course, Trump as cool as ever, now standing, waiting to greet President Vladimir Putin. This is a moment in history that you are now witnessing live. The ramifications of these talks, of course, are huge. Donald Trump standing still, clapping as Russian President Vladimir Putin makes the walk down on American soil in Alaska to meet President Trump. This moment cannot be understated. And the two leaders there embracing. It seems a warm embrace. Conversations being had. Of course, these are the first of so many set to come, and the two leaders walking side by side. Trump and Putin have spoken about their admiration for each other at points, but there's also been clear rhetoric and pressure put on Russia from the US in recent weeks. These visuals we are showing you live now will be viewed again and again in the years to come, no matter which way these peace talks go. Trump has said that he will know within minutes whether Vladimir Putin wants peace. Well, we wait to see if that is the case. Trump's also threatened to walk out on these talks if they are not making progress. This could be pivotal. There could be hours of discussions. Russia's saying there could be 7 hours of talks, but they could be over as soon as Trump decides so. So much on the line. This moment, this image now, this live image we're showing you of the two leaders standing side by side, shaking hands, is a moment in history. Do not forget the significance of what you are seeing right now, because this will be remembered in history books for decades and potentially centuries to come. Thomas Porteous joining us live from the newsroom, my colleague, anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Thomas, we've been waiting for this moment, and it has now happened. Both leaders embracing each other in a warm manner. What do you pick up from that?
Yes, of course, when it comes to Donald Trump, theatrics is what we expect, and that is exactly what we got, Joshua. A smile and a handshake from both leaders as we saw them both descend from their private airplanes down onto Alaskan soil, and seemingly both greeted with a warmth which hasn't been very common in this relationship. It certainly has been a winding road when it comes to the two leaders' rhetoric between each other. We saw them get into a car to start their negotiations here in Alaska, but it goes to show these two figureheads of these two superpower countries finally getting together and for direct talks which have been long overdue. We have been waiting for this moment for so long, but however, we have to say Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky will be watching this and will be have certainly been nervous in regards to viewing that first meeting that we have just seen between those two leaders.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, these moments, both leaders, of course, because of their power and influence, are put on a pedestal, but the human aspect here, two men standing side by side, now sitting in a car, those conversations that we don't know what is being said, but we know are now taking place, the atmosphere that may be at play in the back of that car that they have both stepped into, to be a fly on the wall at that moment. It will be so interesting, of course, to hear the official line on what was said, but so much at play here. I'm now going to go back to Paul Goncharov, a financial analyst, who joins us once again live from Moscow. Paul, thank you ever so much for staying with us. This moment is so significant, of course, for not just the future of this conflict in Ukraine, but also, of course, these bilateral relations. Did you expect the warm embrace that was there?
Well, why not? It's a bromance. In Russian culture, an embrace between men is just that. It's an embrace, like a handshake in the States used to be. But look, they have a mutual respect.
Yes, that mutual respect has been clear. Of course, these relations between the US and Russia have seemed to warm. Daniel Wagner, once again coming back to you. Questions raised about the rhetoric of Trump towards Russia. Critics saying that he is appeasing the Russian president and potentially opening the door to Russian extensions of this conflict. Is that how you view it? Or is this a game from Donald Trump? And again, we always talk about the art of the deal with Trump. Do you think he's potentially manipulating this situation with Vladimir Putin?
So Putin has at least two very prominent tools in his tool chest. And one is the ability to praise Trump, and the other is the ability to manipulate him. And that's why I'm glad that so many others from the American delegation will be present in the room. Beyond that, someone had to make a move here to break this logjam. Otherwise, Ukraine and Russia are just going to continue slugging it out for months, if not years to come. Let's remember that some wars in Russian history have lasted decades. And we should put this into context. This war began in 2014. It's already lasted more than a decade, if you look at it that way. So I applaud the idea of someone breaking the logjam. Now, what exactly Putin's intentions were in doing so, what he has up his sleeve, what he's intended to compromise on, all of that, of course, remains to be seen. But I think that there's a reasonable chance that something useful is going to come out of this, or I don't think that both of these leaders would have flown across the world to meet each other just to shake hands.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, the distance that both leaders have travelled. Alaska, of course, not directly connected to the United States. Flights of long distance signifying, as Daniel said there, the significance of this moment. Daniel, I will stay with you. And of course, Volodymyr Zelensky is not here. It's something I've continued to repeat. But I want your opinion on these talks that are taking place. Is there any world in which steps and the process towards peace can be continued without Zelensky present?
No, I think this is the only stage at which it can realistically be continued or opened without Zelensky present. The question that I have in my mind is, to what extent is Zelensky willing to say, I'm very likely never getting that 20% of my country back, the eastern 20%. So if that's the case, and if the US is not going to fund it anymore, and if I'm going to be completely reliant on the Europeans going forward, what do I have to compromise on? If both Putin and Zelensky go into this thing without a willingness to compromise on something meaningful, nothing is going to change. So I've got to believe that having slugged it out for 3+ years now, that they are both willing to compromise on something. The challenge will be to identify exactly what that is.
Yes, if you are just joining us, these visuals that we are showing you now from a short while ago, President Trump and President Putin both stepping off of their private planes at the same time, touching down on the tarmac and embracing with a handshake. Just a few moments ago, they have now driven off in a car together ahead of these pivotal talks that are set to take place in a short while. A 3-on-3 meeting to take place, not a 1-on-1 meeting as previously reported. That now changing. Cliff Smith, bringing you back in. Shows of power from both men. There was no weakness play. Both men shaking hands, both men standing tall. in this moment of embrace. In your opinion, who holds the power between these two leaders?
Who holds the power and who wields it more wisely or more effectively? I mean, clearly, at the end of the day, the U.S. is the more powerful country. That doesn't necessarily mean they're playing their hand more shrewdly. From my point of view, I would say that Putin already sort of started this with maybe not a huge upper hand, but a slight upper hand just by the idea that he was negotiating directly with the U.S. president on something without Zelensky being there. And what's more, doing so not only on American soil, but in Alaska. That's sort of a double win for him. Number one, there had been a concerted effort to freeze Putin out of being able to go to countries like America because of the Russian war crimes. And number two, Alaska, being formerly Russian territory that was purchased, yes, 150 something years ago, nonetheless, more than that actually, but there is a Russian nationalist narrative that wants Alaska back. I mean, I realize that's fantasy. Nonetheless, it allows Putin to sort of play to his more nationalist base and sort of, pose as the tough guy in Russia, which is politically useful for him back home. So I would say, right from the start, he pocketed a couple of gains. So Trump will need to come up with something more significant to overcome those, from my point of view.
Yes, Cliff, staying with you, what's the significance of this meeting now being a 3-on-3 discussion, and also given the fact that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will be present, somebody who has spoken to Vladimir Putin directly multiple times in recent past?
I mean, Witkoff's a tough nut to crack. He is trusted by Trump, that's clear, but he has very little diplomatic experience. And in my view, his diplomatic experience of the past 6 months or so has been, at best, mixed. I would actually say it was significantly less than mixed, but being generous. At the same time, he is trusted by the president, so that's interesting. It's interesting that Secretary Rubio is also going to be there, by all reports I've seen. I don't know if we saw him in the footage, but he is, if anything, sort of the opposite of Witkoff historically. I mean, he was definitely more on the hawkish side during his time in the Senate, and he has also learned, I think, better than most, which is not unlimited, but better than most, to figure out how to work with Trump to move him closer to his position. Which isn't to say that's unlimited flexibility, but it's some ability to do so. So Rubio being here, I would say, if anything, is sort of the counterweight to Witkoff. He is much more experienced. He has more hawkish views. And I think that, from my point of view, should anything good come of it, it's more likely to come from sort of Rubio's camp.
Yes, Paul Goncharov, I'll come back to you because we've discussed there the top 3 US officials, of course, 2 joining President Donald Trump. But let's now look at the 3 men who will be leading the Russian side of these talks. Of course, President Vladimir Putin, but also Foreign Minister Lavrov and top aide Yushakov. What's the significance of these 2 men and the power that they may play in these discussions with Vladimir Putin? Well, while we wait for Paul to rejoin us, Daniel, I'll come to you once again. Of course, Sergei Lavrov is a key figure who has been part of many discussions, many geopolitical discussions with leaders, of course, a key ally of Vladimir Putin. What's the significance of him being part of these talks? Well, we wait for Daniel as well. So, Cliff, I'll pose that question to you. I won't repeat it because I've said it twice already. But the significance of Lavrov, why is that so key in these talks of 6 men?
I mean, he's one of Putin's longest-standing, big players in the Putin government, and he has sort of taken the lead in a lot of these sorts of negotiations. So, I mean, it certainly shows, and he's well known as being someone that is very good at sort of steering things in the direction that he wants to go through, hard-headedness and bluster, frankly. And so, I mean, it's an advantage to have him around from Putin's point of view. He's been one of the more effective guys from a certain point of view again, at moving things in Russia's direction. But it also just sort of makes the optics of it bigger to have both, the foreign ministers and the heads of state of both countries be there.
Yes, absolutely, Cliff. Staying with you, of course, discussions are set to take place. We know that it is there, but there is a risk of these talks breaking down. Where do you think are the points which could be serious sticking points and points of contention that could see a derailing of these bilateral discussions?
It's very unclear what these are really going to be about at the end of the day. Trump has said he's not negotiating on behalf of the Ukrainians, and yet he's meeting about Ukraine. And he has said that, he said different things at different times, but it's not clear what carrots and sticks he's going to be giving. I think at the end of the day, the U.S.'s biggest involvement is, of course, supplying Ukraine with weapons. And should that stop, then that can be that's very damaging to Ukraine and a huge benefit to Russia. And so that's so Russia is going to want to do anything possible to stop, slow, or make that more difficult or limit that use. Or if that doesn't work, to find some other way that they can sort of use the U.S.'s leverage over Ukraine to its advantage. To what degree Trump is willing to do that is unclear. I hope, that he has come to realize that at the end of the day, Russia is only interested in talking about ceasefires or talking about any sort of cessation of hostilities when significant pressure is put on them. In my view, if he really wanted to get Putin to the negotiating table, what he would come out of the box and say is not, hey, look, I'll help pressure Ukraine. It's, if you don't back off, I'm going to double, triple the number of weapons that go to Ukraine. We are going to start actively, working towards their integration of the EU. We're going to openly, push for them to join NATO. This might all be things that are way down the line, but putting more pressure on Russia is the only way, in my view, that Russia is going to be interested in having serious talks about this. It's not clear to me, based on what I've seen, if Trump is willing to do that. There have been indications he's willing to do that in the past, but there's been many more opposite ones. Has it changed since last time? I don't know. I can say that I was in Kyiv when Putin and Trump had a phone call about ceasefire talks, several months ago. And that same night, there were more, drone and missile attacks on Kyiv and surrounding areas than there had been the night before. So has he learned his lesson from them? I guess we'll find out.
Yes, and we are now joined by Paul Goncharov. Thank you for staying with us, Paul. So
No
much
problem.
that has been discussed already. But again, this meeting, these visuals that we're continuing to show you, showing two men from two countries in a conflict that involves so many. How do you think this meeting is going to be perceived by Europe and other players? Just hold on, sorry, Paul. Just hold on 1 second. There are some visuals on screen so far unclear. We will cut back to them when they clear up. But it would seem to be Trump and Putin sitting down with their delegations as well. But yes, Paul, very briefly, before we move back to those visuals, how significant are other players like Europe in their opinions on this war as this summit is set to start?
Well, I think the whole Ukraine story has been catastrophic for the UK and the EU. It's been very advantageous for the United States, and they're not. It's a non-starter. EU and the UK, they're not really important to anyone. Certainly not here in Russia. And as far as the United States, it's a client piece of geography, to put it coldly. So I don't think that even comes into the equation.
Paul, I just want to build off that. Of course, European nations, including the UK, France, Germany, among other nations, they may not be a part of these talks, but they have been contributing defensively in terms of arms and, of course, aid and finances to Ukraine in this conflict. And, of course, the rhetoric coming from Europe has been one of concern about Russian expansion. So do you think that their support is meaningless? I just want to build on what you said and question it and try and understand what exactly it was you meant.
I think it is ineffective. And look, from my point of view, I'm just talking as an individual here. I think the whole the conflict is pretty much over. Right now, it'll be the negotiation between Russia and the United States of how to clean it up, how to tidy up the situation. That being said, it's all in the hands of Trump and Putin right now, which path to take.
Yes, well, of course, the European Union and European nations disagreeing with that point. Of course, they held that conversation with Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump virtually, and there was some rhetoric from Donald Trump following that meeting about looking at land and territory and ceding territory, a big topic, of course, Cliff, something that Ukraine have been staunch on, saying they don't want to give up. Zelensky saying it's unconstitutional, and also it's seen, of course, as a defeat in this conflict. Do you think Zelensky could budge, Cliff, full term, not just for a short ceasefire, but in the long run, for a permanent end to this war? Do you think Zelensky would ever concede land?
No, and I don't think he should. I think that would simply allow the most ruthless aggressors to seize territory and claim it as their own. I think that would be a geopolitical catastrophe. Whether or not you have sort of a Korea-like ceasefire where, you know, neither side ever formally concedes, but it remains, I mean, that might be better than the alternative, given whatever alternative is available. But I mean, anything shy of that, I do think would be a catastrophe in the long run for geopolitics.
Yes, absolutely. Cliff and Paul, thank you ever so much for both joining us. Also, thank you to Daniel Wagner for taking the time to talk us through the first moments of these bilateral discussions between Russia and, of course, the United States. We will continue to bring you live updates as these meetings continue. Make sure to stay tuned here on NewsX World.